Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Perry Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same.
Welcome. This is Perry Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. And today I am delighted to be able to introduce you to our next guest. This is Kathy Beiser. Kathy and I have known each other for, I think it's more than 15 years now. We met.
I think so.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't want to date us too much, so we'll just go with 15. We met when we were both managing directors at Burson Marsteller. But since then, Kathy has gone on to even bigger and better things. First as Vice President of Corporate Communications at Discover. Then she was EVP and CCO of Hilton and took them through one of the most wildly successful IPOs. And today she is the Global Corporate Practice Chair for Edelman. So she's obviously done extremely well. But, when I think of Kathy, I really think of three things that make her stand out to me. She is incredibly capable, she is committed, and she is caring. And I think those three things make her really a special person and a wonderful professional. So, Kathy, thanks so much for giving us your time.
Oh, thank you, Perry. And thank you for saying such nice things. Seriously, it's nice to have those three words be used as a descriptor.
You can pay me later. I'll be your PR person. So, we know where you are today, but obviously there was a lot of steps along the way. So can you tell us a little bit about how it was that you feel you got launched? What was the job or the move that happened that really kind of put your career on this trajectory?
It's funny. I've been giving some thought to my career because people have asked me this lately, and I think it's because I've been doing a bunch of speaking with it, at colleges, universities, and all of that to folks who are looking at, getting their careers off. And I think there were a couple of times, and one of them was, so right after college, I did not want to move back home. I didn't have a job either. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I applied to graduate school. Why not? Incur more debt. But anyway, and found a job through a friend, and I was working in an in-house public relations department, and I was just writing letters for an employee newsletter. Fine, great, lovely people, got my feet wet, got a little bit of a paycheck, but I wouldn't count that as my first job because, I don't know, it just didn't seem like the one that sort of launched me. And the one that really did was after I had listened to a speaker who had come to my graduate program. And I knew we had an internship as part of this program, but it was going to be in a corporation, and I knew it was going to be outside a metropolitan area. And being 22 years old, I thought, listen, I'd really rather spend my summer in, in a downtown city environment. So I went up to the speaker afterwards, and I said, listen, we don't have any agencies sponsoring internships as part of this program. I'd love to come work for you this summer. What do you think? I have no idea where I got the guts to do that. Maybe it was, again, fear of having a bad summer. But I will say, I think he was so taken aback that he did his sort of hibba-hibba. And then, a few weeks later, we worked out all the details. So for me, that was the launch because during the middle of the internship, I got hired. So for me, that set me on a course of full employment, graduating school with a job, which happened 6 months later. So I think that was probably the first one that really launched me.
I love that story. And I'll tell you, what you did, courage, you took a risk, you thought, what have I got to lose, right? Fear.
That was a big one,
clear,
yes.
Right? Yeah, and fear is a great motivator. I'm sorry, but, fear and love, I think, are the two most universal motivators for all of humankind. So it's like, don't ever underestimate that. Perfectly justifiable.
Yeah. You know what? We do what we have to do. I mean, sometimes fear drives, you're right, it drives a lot of things, but I'm hopeful that in latter years that love or interest or other drivers have, propelled my career.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think, when fear is the motivation, you also have to always be careful about whether or not it becomes a very negative, situation and you end up doing things you didn't want to do. But that didn't happen here, so it's all good.
I look at some of the other career decisions that I made too, and I can recall also taking a really tough job, and I almost went there kicking and screaming. The firm had a very tough reputation. It was known as a sweatshop. And the people actually weren't that very nice when I first met them, and I like, I'm not sure I want to work here. But I took a job because I thought, if I can last a couple of years, I will get certain experiences that I might not get other places. And I did. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what I didn't want to do with my life. Yep. But I stayed there 3. And I will say that was another point where I just said, you know what? I gutted this through. And it wasn't all horrible, trust me. But it was very, very tough. And I'm glad I did it.
I look at my period like that was Russia, right? And it wasn't that the employer wasn't good. The employer was great, but the environment was brutal. It was very isolating. It was the time when it was very much the wild, wild west. So I felt, rightly or wrongly, I felt like almost constantly in true fear, and it was very hard to get a date. And, there's just lots of things that made it difficult. Like forget the snow, and everything else. So I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'll tell you, here's one story. When I remember being pretty junior, it was a Friday during the summer, and this was back when calling somebody from an airplane, first of all, it happened, but it happened really infrequently and probably cost $1 million. But I got a call from my boss at the time. I said, listen, I'm coming back. We're going to work on this really big deal. It was during the savings and loan crisis, but I need you on this. Can you do this? Can you wait for me? I'll meet you at the office. It was going to be about, Friday at 4:30. I said, okay. I mean, I had plans for the weekend, but you know what? This was why I took this job. Well, I sat there and I waited, and about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, I'm still waiting at the office, and I get a call. My boss is at her lake house and said it can wait till the weekend, through the weekend and stuff. So I learned then and there that was not going to be the kind of boss I wanted to be. So, it just was one of those things that if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, I suppose.
Exactly. And you held in the expletives that you wanted to say, because self-control is another really important feature of being a successful professional.
Absolutely. But you know what? She never got that part of my commitment again.
Yeah.
She got it surface, but I didn't care as much about her anymore. Yeah. I realized that, I could survive without her. And that's eventually what happened. But it was really interesting to me because it shaped how I said I will never do anything like this ever to anybody on my team.
Yep.
It was a power move, right? And she was trying to make sure I knew she was in charge. So it was a different time back then, too. I think there was women before us, some of whom perhaps might have, I don't know, they broke ceilings, absolutely, and forever grateful, but perhaps didn't feel as good about bringing other women along.
Yeah, I would agree.
A bit of there's a small cadre of women who have felt that way. I've been blessed to have met more of the other, but definitely have seen some of that.
So we survived those early years, and you get to mid-career. I know that you are happily married, and you have 2 wonderful kids. But every woman in that phase, while you're trying to build your career and, start a family or manage a family or take care of aging parents, whatever the combination of caregiving might be, it's a lot of stress. Talk to us about how did you, what kind of compromises and trade-offs did you have to make? How did you do it? How did you survive? Did you ever feel like throwing in the towel?
Oh, gosh. It's so funny. A young man, I was teaching at Howard University last week, and this young man actually asked me the same question. He said, how do you survive those moments of doubt or when it just seems all too much, or did you ever consider changing? And I looked at him and I said, absolutely. Oh, my gosh, life is full of stress, and there are days, right? There are days. And I said, I can remember questioning a lot of things. And I think middle years in careers are some of the toughest for the reasons that you point out, but also because you have less control. You have less control over your work life. You have a little bit less over your personal life. And what I realize is that there is no such thing as work-life balance because that implies stasis, right? It implies things are, sort of if you think of scales, I suppose, work is up, family's down, and then it switches, right? But overall, you try to find an average that feels good to you, So, and I think in a career and in family, you end up making lots of very difficult choices. I think it's difficult to rise vertically for both men and women. without making very difficult decisions sometimes that seem to deprioritize family.
Yep.
And that has happened for me around, I think, specific career milestones when I was making a jump, when it was a big move forward. I felt like I had to deprioritize family. It's not that I forgot about them, my Lord, no way. But there were times when I was like, you know what? I need you, my husband, to step up on this, and you handle this more than I can do right now. And then I found other ways to have, meaningful touch points. With the family, for example, and the kids in their schools, I decided I was never going to be the mom who baked or did envelopes or, whatever the volunteer. I was the field trip mom. I would make that time and go do that because that was time spent as opposed to just helpful time to the teachers.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be with the kids, which is where it really counts. Right. I agree.
Yeah, exactly. And, the woman who gave me that piece of advice was actually my physician. Very successful OBGYN in Chicago. And she was the same way. And we laughed because she was on television a lot and I worked a lot, from a media relations perspective. And we thought, how did we ever find each other? I mean, I've known her for, 30 years now. But anyway, she was very helpful in giving me that piece of advice. And I have paid that particular one forward a lot because it is about finding ways to make those moments be very meaningful and then deciding what you're not going to do and not feel guilty about it. As soon as I got rid of some of the guilt, I was so much better. I mean, believe me, because I think you said caring, which is lovely, but I care very much. I care very much that people are happy and I care very much about how my kids are doing, how my husband's doing. But I think that one of the things I also learned early on was to not over-explain. So my daughter's 21, and when I first had her, I had, first of all, my promotion announcement, I got promoted when I was pregnant with her, said something about my unborn child in it, which I found to be
Thank you.
particularly fascinating. But since she had absolutely nothing to do with it, and as a matter of fact, maybe it was a little bit of a handicap given the size of my ankles. However, I will say that it was one of those moments people just assume, well, you're going to be part-time or you're going to do this, you're going to do that. There was all these assumptions made. And you realize once you do have kids, there are things that you have to do with, like you actually have to take care of them. You have responsibilities, and
Somebody
it's all
must
very
feed
lovely.
Them. Right, exactly.
Yes. But one of the things I learned is that I stopped telling people when I had to do certain things like take her to the doctor or I was going to do some class or figure something out because I realized a lot of my other colleagues never talked about their lives outside of work in that much specificity, especially the guys. And I don't mean that to sound like a sexist kind of thing, but I just found a lot more ease and comfort with the statement, hey, I'm going to be offline for the next couple of hours or so, but I can get back to you later tonight, or those kinds of things. Yeah. So to me, that was a bit more of that was a huge learning that I don't need to over-explain. And then have people always think of me as the person who had half her mind on something else. Yep. And so that's how I sort of compartmentalized a little bit.
We made it through that middle period, and now, you're kind of at the executive level. Well, you're very clearly at the executive level. And, as you get to the top, it's just so unfortunate because it seems to me that like almost as men move up, somehow it gets a little bit easier. And as women move up, it gets harder. And when I talk about harder, there's really two key things that research is suggesting are just really more difficult. One is as men move up, they are more liked. Even if they're not likable men, they are more liked just because of their increase in status. And women, it's the opposite. It may be fair, it may be unfair, but the bottom line is as women move up, they end up being liked less. So that's one thing. And the second thing is this incredibly harsh scrutiny that women have. Now, part of it is, of course, because there just aren't as many of us at the top. But for whatever reason, and it's not just performance. Performance is fair game, in my opinion, but it's your looks and your parenting and your, just everything seems to come under the microscope. So as you've hit this executive level, first of all, have you felt those things? Have you felt the scrutiny? Have you felt the, issues in terms about being liked or respected and made the trade-offs? And if you have, how did you deal with it? That
question itself is so complex for me. And let me tell you why. I was raised by a very traditional 1950s high school graduate, college graduate, and actually she had a graduate degree too. But her mindset was very post-war, right? So very, you should be likable and agreeable kind of thing. So I was sort of raised to be that way, except she always had this tension about, well, express your mind, do what you want. And by the way, I do expect you to have a career and all these things. But it was a bit of a challenge to sort of balance independence and be liked.
Yeah, exactly.
Be agreeable kind of thing. Be a nice girl, don't make too many waves. And certainly when you're younger, you get all these indicators that, you get behavior marks when you're in school and all of that, don't affect you as a kid. Like Kathy was talking too much in class today. I had to put Kathy in the hallway today because she was talking to her friends, or she did this, or she rolled her eyes at the teacher when she thought she wasn't looking. So those things
never happened to me, by the way. Never happened to me. I was never told I was too chatty. It just didn't happen. Sorry. Can't relate.
I'm sure. Right.
Exactly.
But it's so, but then so you get these habits. And I think by nature, I just want to get along with people. That is part of who I am. So that presents sort of a little cosmic dilemma for me, because nobody's paying you to be agreeable. They're paying you to get a job done. They're paying you for your ideas. They're paying for you to bring others together to get things accomplished. But you want to do that in an environment that you're not leaving bodies in the wake, per se. You want your time on this planet, I've always thought, should be fun. It should be enjoyable. So it's the balance between the two, right? So what I started figuring out is I just had to be authentic to myself. If I was trying to be somebody different at work than I was at home, and there's a little bit of difference, trust me, but those things that I like about myself, I try to bring those to work. I care desperately about the work, the people I work with, all of that. So trying to keep that front and center, even if it's a tough message that I have to deliver, remember the people part of it first, and then move on and try to not make it personal, that type of thing. So that's been a big struggle. The other thing, though, was that I've learned to pick my battles. I used to charge up every hill. Like I had to win and take it, right? And I think I exhausted people around me and myself, and the outrage, the moral outrage. What? You cannot see my point of view? Or I'm not going to win this one? It was really exhausting and counterproductive. So what I learned was that when I was much more selective, I found out that people actually liked me better too. It wasn't, oh, here she comes again, one of these things. So I think that's when you focus on what's really important, people listen, and then, the respect follows. At least ideally it does, assuming you're saying something smart, doing something right. But I think those aspects of it. But, I have felt criticism throughout my career, and it hurts. I mean, I cannot say that I brush it off easily. It's that cold grip around my heart when, I've done something that either has hurt somebody, I've done something incorrectly, I have not lived up to somebody's expectations. By the way, all of those things are about being human.
Yep, absolutely.
But it's hard as an overachiever to sort of admit that you do that stuff. And so I try so hard to step back. And the personal stuff, I don't care anymore. I just don't care. You don't like my style. You found that, I was too critical, or, and I look back and I say, was I too critical? Actually, I just was critical. I disagreed, or I thought the quality wasn't where it needed to be. Was I unkind? If I was unkind, then I need to apologize. If I was balanced, if I was constructive, if I was encouraging, then that's okay. But you don't have to sugarcoat everything. But I have been told over the years, and sometimes we hear these things third hand, which is always just so lovely. But to get gosh, that was so condescending. Well, what was condescending about it? Was it just because I needed more substance, that I didn't think it was well thought out? Was hey guys, we've been working on this for 3 days and we're not there yet. And I really need to get this done by tomorrow. So what do you need from me so that we can get it done?
Right, exactly.
That was interpreted as condescending.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's short of writing it or doing it myself, and that as we know, we can't do those things.
Not once you get to the top. Exactly. When you're at the top,
right. So it's a challenge, but I do want to make sure that I don't come across that way, and it's always a good check for me. And I always I take on feedback. I decide what feels authentic, and if something feels really authentic, is sort of an outlier, I sort of park it. If something else comes up like that again, I say, this is interesting. I've now heard this twice.
Yep.
But one person, you sort of take that and let it go. I'm much more about letting it go. And at this point in my career, I'm very, very focused on worrying about the things that truly matter.
It's interesting. You know, I remember one of my Burson bosses, and it was really instructive. So at the time, I was getting a lot of these dings, just like you, right? I was the person to go to. I mean, I remember the story you told me when we first met that I scared you.
You
right?
scared me. You scared the heck out of me. You are a force of nature, all right? But I was in awe. I was like, oh my gosh,
right.
this woman has got it together more than anybody I've ever met.
Well, okay,
so,
I don't know about that, but what I will say is, certain words were used to describe me, including like tornado and whatever, but it was like, I was force of nature. And so what happened was, what I found, so this first boss in my mid-career, he was really helpful because he basically said, I know a lot of people are talking to you about changing and about whatever. And what he said is, look, there's a lot of people in this company that don't want to work with you. He said, and that would really concern me. But he said, all of our best people want to work with you. So he said, I'm just going to tell you, don't, listen to it, see what you think is real. But he said, I don't want you to get distracted by all of the naysayers because you deliver, you're an excellent client person, whatever. And so he made me feel okay about the fact that, yes, I was incredibly driven and hard charging and, use whatever word you want in terms of aggressive, assertive. And, I was just determined to do an excellent job. And I didn't want to do anything less than an excellent job. And people who only wanted to kind of get by, they did not want to play on the team with me because that was just not the way I was built. Now, that was great at the mid-career to get that advice. Now, what happened is I got higher up the ladder and I went corporate. I actually got very different advice, which is, and I thought this was also so helpful. And so I'll give a call out to Charlie Strauss because he was the one who said this to me from Unilever. And it really was, he was just wonderful. And he said, here's the thing, Perry, that in a corporation versus an agency, that your job is by definition to take a mediocre team, right? And he wasn't talking about any of the individual people. He was just saying, like, in the world, if it all averages out, everybody's facing the same kind of caliber team in terms of the law of averages, right? But he said what your job is as the leader is to take a mediocre team or an average team and to get an above average performance. And so he said, you can't just pick and choose only the great people, which is what you could do in an agency, right? You and I could both cherry pick and say, we want this person on our account, this person, whatever. But in a corporation, you couldn't. And so I actually had to completely change the way I thought about it. And then it really became about servant leadership. And so it wasn't lead from the front and charge, at least it wasn't every day. A lot of it was about lead from behind. And I think that's a really different thing. And both of those pieces of advice were so solid.
I couldn't agree more with those. I think I got a little bit of a similar sort of leadership advice. I sort of learned by absolutely failing by trying to lead all the time when I went to the corporate environment and trying to affect change maybe too quickly, talking, in one job, I know that I was speaking from their perspective in tongues. What I was used to doing was so different than what my team was used to doing. I didn't realize there was a gap. I just thought everybody understood what I was talking about. That was incredibly naive and perhaps arrogant of me. So, I spent a lot of time talking with my team and getting feedback and sort of did a do-over, if you will. It was my very first CCO role. And I just said, okay, guys, clearly I've come in here with a lot of ideas and either I'm scaring, exhausting, I don't know what's going on, but we're not gelling. So what's going on? Ended up making some changes on the team, which I realized there were people that were not working towards the same goal. Let's leave it that way. And then, but once we did that, all of a sudden, yes, it was helping these folks get the best out of themselves. There's one woman I worked with, hadn't had enough, I think, visible leadership, had not been put in front. And to me, that was really interesting because she's like, no, I'm comfortable here. And I was like, no. You know what you're talking about. You need to be front and center on this. I will help position you for success, and you need to have that exposure. During my time there, she got promoted to a very senior position. She's incredibly capable. And I feel glad and very grateful because I think she was one of my big skeptics when I walked in the door. And to this day, I would count her as a friend. Somebody who, I still really like and respect. So those kinds of things were incredibly gratifying for me. But to your original point, I would agree that it's just amazing the kind of labels that women get tagged with now and then. I can remember sitting in an executive committee meeting in one organization where we were discussing senior talent progression, and a remark was made about a woman vice president that she needed to have some of her harsher edges softened. And I just
You're sure it wasn't me?
No, it was not you.
Okay.
So I sat there, and there was only one other woman in the room. And so I looked at her, and I said, well, here goes. I said, so what does that mean? Well, she's aggressive, hard-charging. And I said, so help me just to understand, because I'm trying to understand the culture of this company and what's appropriate and all that. Would we be having this same conversation about this person or that person, both of whom are guys and who might have had the same labels attached to them? And there was just sort of a nodding, a bit of a sheepishness around the table. And to the CEO's credit and some others, they said, you know what? You're absolutely right. We cannot be that kind of organization. And I know that this woman whom they were speaking about is doing great and has been promoted and has an incredibly successful career. And she is still hard-charging and aggressive, and is what that company needs. So kudos to her, right? And I think that it behooves all of us, though, to raise a hand now and then, right?
I agree. You know, it's funny because I say all the time, like, and trust me, I didn't always do this right early in my career. I found myself sometimes criticizing other women too, and on these same things that I now am like, oh my gosh, if we can't support each other, and I don't mean support like pick a woman that's not qualified or whatever. I mean doing exactly what you did, which is just raising the thought in people's minds that are we really talking about a performance issue? Are we really talking about delivery or even team culture, right? Because all of those things were actually fine. It was a bias that people didn't even know they had, and I think that if we can't help people understand, and the more and more research that comes out about why diverse teams are more successful, right? We've got to be able to be more accepting of different styles and different attitudes and different looks and whatever, because that's the world. We're in a globalized marketplace. That is the world we're working in. And it also is demonstrating that is where you get the best performance. So, I think you did a service to women and you did a service to that company, but it takes guts to do that.
It does. I think it takes maybe experience, having seen others do it, and question.
Yep.
I've learned from others, and I think I've also learned what not to do. And that, people say, who are your mentors in this? Some of the worst people were mentors to me because I learned of the things I just don't want to do, right? Yep. Or, wow, this sounded less credible. It sounded too emotional. And that to me is, it's funny, women often get tagged with that "we're so emotional" tag, which is incredibly annoying. I just have turned that into passion, and feeling that's, and figuring out, though, that I don't have to be passionate about everything. And so, again, back to that focus issue.
So looking back, you got to the top. You've had an amazing career. You're still in the midst of an amazing career with many years ahead of you. But looking back, I don't know anybody who got to the top that didn't end up having a difficult break or something outrageous that happened to them or embarrassing or whatever. Would you be, since it clearly didn't derail you, would you be willing to share with listeners, an experience that it seems almost like surreal, right? But it really happened, just because I think that we often don't share things like that. And so young women who are facing these things, they're thinking this stuff doesn't happen anymore. And I'm trying to let them know, it unfortunately is happening. And you just have to figure out how to deal with it.
Oh, yeah. It's in small things when I've stepped in things that I had no business being nearby. And, sometimes I found myself getting caught up in, whether it be a bad storyline, a gossip situation, those things you learn hopefully pretty early on. You got to just stay out of all of that. But yeah, I have. I alluded to the one where I had a big misstep with my team at one organization. I also chose the wrong place to work. And, that to me was galling. I was ready for a big step in my career. I was excited about it, loved all the people I met throughout the process. And based on what I had been told about the job and its scope and, all the aspects of it, seemed like a really good fit, seemed really, really good. And it wasn't. It just wasn't. And on multiple levels, it was good, but I didn't connect with my boss.
Yeah.
And it was, for whatever reason, a bad fit, wrong personalities. The job also was smaller than I thought it was going to be. It turned out to be more about, it was just a smaller agenda. No harm, no foul. It was just, though, something that wasn't working for me. And I think the harder I tried, the worse it got. I think, and I started to lose myself. And my family noticed it. I think I was depressed. I was anxious. I wasn't sleeping. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have made a commitment to this organization. I made a commitment to my family. I got to make this work. And you keep trying and you keep trying. And I was banging my head against the wall. And I started losing myself and I got worse. I mean, I don't think I was anywhere near effective by the end. I was before I realized it was in such, a dire situation. And there were certain aspects of the role and the entire environment I just couldn't fix for a variety of reasons.
It happens.
And so I needed to go.
So how did you make the decision to go? It sounds like it was clear at that point, Amy, because you recognized the signs and the signals and that things were changing and it wasn't positive.
Yeah, but I didn't get good feedback from my boss either. So this person wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. So it was that kind of conversation, to be honest. It was, he's not happy, I'm not happy. Okay, what do we do about this?
Yep.
You know what? A lot of good stuff accomplished, but wrong fit. And it was an incredible learning experience for me. And, you go through a lot of mourning. What is it, 7 stages of grief?
Yeah.
This shock, this can't possibly be happening, anger, sadness, all of those things. And I was depressed. And then I was okay.
Yep.
And I'm not whitewashing this because it was a process.
Yep.
I had a long talk with my cousin who was a very senior person for a very, very large company who had a very similar situation. And I saw her earlier this spring, and we were just laughing at the similarities of our experience, but also the stages that you pass through. And how we both could look back at this point and sort of laugh at a bunch of stuff and say, well, I'm never getting caught up in that kind of crazy again. That is never happening to me. And yet be profoundly grateful for some of the relationships that we established, with the people, that we came in contact with in those roles. I'm still really close with a number of people from, during that time, which I value, and that's added a lot to my life. So it was just a detour. But it created, I grew up a lot, even more. So I think it helped prepare me for the next role. So all I can say is that these things happen, and you can either let them kill you, or you can just let it wash over, process it, move on. And I made it sound a whole lot simpler than it actually is, for the record.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think you've actually touched on something else I was going to ask you about in terms of, not only difficulty, but what you would change in looking back. And the truth is, it sounds to me like what you said at the end was, yes, this was a brutally difficult experience. And it was horrifying because you made a mistake and you realized it, and then you kind of felt trapped in it. So you had to kind of follow through to a certain degree, and then you extricated yourself. But the truth is that the very last thing you said was, hey, but it probably set you up for the next job, right? And I think that one of the things that we need to think about when we think about like what would you change or wishing these bad times away. Well, I would never want to go through it again, and I would never wish that on you either. It is true that these really tough situations, They build your resilience, they teach you who you are, and they do prepare you for what's next, because a lot of the bad stuff helps you then pick the right stuff and to know what you really want going forward.
Oh, absolutely. And there are probably a few things that as I was doing my, 100th time of reviewing the entire interview process, the 2.5 years, whatever, I was trying to look for those lessons learned, because not that I would obsess about that or anything. I will say there were clues. Yeah. And now I'm much more attuned to them, things I would have picked up that would have said, hey, you know what? My communication style or my approach is not going to work in this particular situation. Or I'm concerned about this. I've heard this 3 times. I've sort of not, I'm still thinking maybe it's not true, but it is true. Yeah. So it's a long way of saying that there are all sorts of clues. The thing that I will never let happen to me again is I will never have a job cause me to lose myself. That cannot happen. It's just, life is way too short, and to be miserable and panicked and anxious for such a long time is not a good way to live. It wasn't fair to myself, my family.
I will tell you a very short story that a woman has already shared on the program, which I thought was it'll just reinforce the point you just made, which is she recently wrote a book, and it's about, it's design your life, right? And it's also about your career. And she actually starts by saying, when I knew that it was time to change, it's because I woke up in an ambulance looking at my feet and recognizing that she basically had some kind of, whether it was a panic attack or whatever, right? And she said, it was because I realized I was not taking care of myself. I was so stressed and so overworked and so whatever. And I just thought, good on you for sharing that, yes, these things happen to real women, to lots of us. And if you don't recognize it and say, there is a line that I will not cross. There is a degree to which I am not going to give my life up to this job. And when you end up in the back of an ambulance, or when you end up, as you said, not sleeping, whatever, then at that point, and I'm not talking not sleeping for a few days. I'm talking, like, as you said, not sleeping for right, exactly, for a long period of time. It's like, it's time to throw in the towel. It really is. And I think that, my mom always said, honey, we tried to build you tough. But after 3 years in Russia, what she said to me when I finally came home, she said, honey, we wanted to build you tough, but I think we overdid it. She said, really, you should have quit there a long time ago, right? And I was like, and she was right? But it is what it is. So, Kathy, we're coming to the end of our time together on this show. Your insights have been wonderful. I appreciate your candor. It's been great. If you had a last word, you've been able to craft the career and the life of your dreams. If you were able to share one piece of advice, a final piece of advice with other women trying to do the same, what would you tell them?
I think it starts with finding out what really drives you. And for me, it's been about learning. And if I'm not learning, there's a lot of online shopping going on. I just got to say that because I'm bored, right? And so, but in all seriousness, as I've looked at my career, it has been about finding something that challenges me, helps me learn something different, not just as an exercise of intellectual proportion, but more as a growth thing. Each of those pieces has helped me progress to the next level. But if I had looked at it clearly as a vertical, straight path, linear sort of approach that I wanted to go to the top, I might have missed out on some of those pieces that prepared me to get to that next level. So not being so narrow focused and being able to see, to the sides a little bit, that to me has made both a very rewarding career from, an intellectual and an emotional standpoint, but also it's made a very successful one by how I've defined it, you know. So for me, I just think it's all about finding what drives you and being open to different twists and turns along the way.
Kathy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
my pleasure.
I can't wait to see you soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Barry.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics